Okay, we're going to start notes over World War One. I am going to try to make these as short and sweet as possible. I will try not to ramble, but we're going to start talking about World War One. Last time we talked about the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which sparked World War One to start. So we'll start. The alliance system in Europe basically collapses, and I think that was pretty well known. You had the Triple Alliance between Italy, Austria, Hungary, and Germany. And then you had the Triple Entente, which was between Great Britain, France, and Russia. When Austria declares war, it sets off this chain reaction, and it was nearly all of the nations in Europe become at war. And the chain reaction sets off like this. Because Austria declared war on Serbia, Russia starts to move towards Austria, because you remember Russia supported Serbia. Russia starts to move in on Germany because Germany was an ally of Austria. So Germany declares war on Russia. France is Russia's ally. So Germany declares war on France. At this time, most of Europe is now at war. So you can kind of see how this chain reaction sparks a huge war that happens. Most of Europe was at war. Germany comes up with a military plan that would help them to win the war. Their military plan is known as the Schlieffen Plan. And in the Schlieffen Plan, they had kind of planned on a two-front war because they were at war with France and Russia. They knew that they would have to go west first, so attack France first, and then race east to attack Russia. So their plan was to attack France, defeat France, and then send those troops to help defeat Russia in the east. So speed was really important. But the problem was that France had their entire border lined with troops so that the Germans could not get in. This would make it a very slow process for them to get in. They would have to have a war to even get into France. However, there was a gateway, and that gateway was Belgium. They could pass through Belgium and get to France. They would be able to go in without any conflict. But the problem with Belgium was neutral. They were not involved with anybody. So Germany demands to be allowed to pass through Belgium, but Belgium refuses. So Germany attacks Belgium. They have an unprovoked attack on Belgium. And this upsets a lot of people. Great Britain, it makes them very upset. They were outraged because they said that Belgium was very unprovoked and that was violating their contract of neutrality, or their, not necessarily contract of neutrality, but their declaration of neutrality. They thought it didn't respect that. So in response to this, Great Britain declares war on Germany. Okay, so now we have war. We have two sides. You have the Central Powers, which are Germany, Austria, Hungary, and they are later joined in the war by Bulgaria and the Ottomans, but it starts out as Germany and Austria, Hungary. Those are your Central Powers, and they are called the Central Powers because of their location in Central Europe. Then you have the Allied Powers, which is Great Britain, France, and Russia. They are weeks later actually, joined by Japan, and then months later, they are joined by Italy. And if you'll notice, at the beginning, Italy was a part of the Triple Alliance with Germany. However, they switched to the Allies because they really did not appreciate Germany's attack on Belgium. They thought that it was unprovoked and it was not a fair thing. So they kind of claimed that their involvement with the Triple Alliance had been a defensive strategy, and they did not like that the Germans did that unprovoked attack on Belgium. So they said they were not obligated to stay with the Triple Alliance. So now you have these two sides. In 1914, men started off to battle hoping that it would not be a long war, that the new technologies of war would make it a really quick war. However, Sir Edward Grey says, the lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime, basically meaning this will not be a quick war. And his prediction was very true. Okay, so we're going to talk about the war on two fronts. The war starts out on the Western Front. Germany attacks France. They're able to go through Belgium and attack France, and it turns into a deadlock. Basically, both sides firing at each other, no one's moving anywhere. They're just firing at each other. And this becomes known as the Western Front. This is the deadlocked area in northern France where the battle was fought. By September 3rd, Germany was able to occupy the edge of Paris, and they started to really feel like victory was close. They thought victory was near. However, the French came into contact with some intelligence that of the directions that the German army was going to make. So they figured out what direction the German army was going to take so they could attack them. And that's what they do. The Allies used that intelligence and they attack the Germans north of Paris on the valley of the Marne River, and it's known as the Battle of the Marne. And they were able to drive Germany back about 60 miles. The reason why this is really important is because while the Schlieffen Plan had been looking really good because they were able to get into France, after the first Battle of the Marne, it was now left in ruins. It proved that it was not going to be a quick entry, that it was going to be a very slow defeat, and that they were not going to have that speed that they wanted. So the Schlieffen Plan is pretty much completely blown. And then there was a battle going on in the east. Russia had already invaded Germany in the east, so it officially turns World War I into a two-front war. The Western Front and the Eastern Front. And you guys actually have a taste of the Western Front in your book that you're reading, All Quiet on the Western Front. I'll show you guys this map of the Western Front. This is where the Western Front was mainly fought, and you can pause the video if you'd like to look at the map a little bit longer. But as you can see, it's on the France and German border, and you can see Belgium right here is how they crossed into France. Okay, war on the Western Front was kind of interesting, and they participated in what is known as trench warfare. Both armies dug these trenches, or these big, long ditches, basically, and they were used to protect themselves. And trench warfare was just when soldiers fought each other from these trenches. And in your book, there's a good picture on 749. This is an okay picture, and I'm going to show you guys pictures in class of the trenches, but you can see that they've kind of set up camp in these trenches. The life in the trenches was horrible. You've read in All Quiet that the rats were horrible. They were disgusting. They slept in mud. They walked in mud. They breathed mud. Everything was just so muddy. So this is how they fought the war. And the land that was between the opposing sides' trenches was known as no man's land. And whenever they were ordered to go over the top, most of the time they were met with a machine gun fire. And the trenches, being down in the trenches, did not necessarily ensure safety, because artillery fire was coming in that brought a lot of death into the trenches as well. But and we've read about that in All Quiet. You hear about all the shells that flying over the trenches and how they're going to escape the shells. So you kind of get a good taste of what trench warfare is like from All Quiet on the Western Front. In 1916, the Germans launch an attack against the French at Verdun, at the Battle of Verdun. In this battle, each side loses about 300,000 men, which is a huge amount of men. Because the French were struggling, they had lost a lot of men, the British army comes in and they try to relieve the pressure, and they attack the Germans northwest of Verdun, which is in France, at the Battle of the Somme, which is in the Somme River Valley. 20,000 men were lost in the first battle alone, and by the end of the Battle of the Somme, each side had suffered about 500,000 casualties. About 500,000 people had died. there were, as you can tell from this battle, there was huge amounts of casualties and not a whole lot of productivity. The warring sides near Verdun, the Germans probably advanced about 4 miles, and in the Somme, the British only advanced about 5 miles. So not a whole lot of productivity and not a whole lot of movement, but a lot of casualties. And this was attributed to the new technologies, poison gas that was used as a weapon that would cause men to die either by choking, it would blind them, and a lot of them wore gas masks in the trenches. Airplanes were used. It was the first time that airplanes were ever used in a combat situation. Submarines, the Germans brought in the idea and the submarines into war. And we're going to talk more about submarine warfare and unrestricted submarine warfare later in the war, but the Germans bring in the U-boats, which are these big submarines that advance naval battles. And the machine guns was another powerful and very, very important technology brought into the war. And the machine guns caused the most damage as far as loss of human life, because the machine guns basically automatically spit out ammunition, and they were able to take out just waves of soldiers in a huge amount of time, and a huge amount of soldiers in a little amount of time. So it was really hard for soldiers to escape the machine gun, making it very hard for troops to have any big advancements. Here is a map of the Eastern Front, and that's what we're going to start talking about here, is the Eastern Front of the war. And it's right here on the German, Austria-Hungary, and Russian border, and the battles are fought in the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front was a little bit different than the Western Front. It was a little bit more mobile, but they did have lots of slaughters, lots of stalemate, lots of deadlock, so it wasn't much different, but it was a little bit more mobile. And the Eastern Front is just the stretch of battlefield along the German and Russian border, and the Russians and the Serbs were battling the Germans, Austrians, and eventually the Turks join. At the beginning, the Russian forces attack Austria and Germany. And Germany counterattacks in the Battle of Tannenberg, which is in Germany, and it sparks a 4-day battle. In this battle, the Germans are able to completely crush the Russian army and drive them to retreat back east. They were successful because they were able to regain East Prussia, and after this battle, they were able to seize horses, they were able to get guns, they were able to get supplies from the enemy, so that was successful. And during this battle, about 30,000 Russian men were killed. However, Russia's tides start to turn, and Russia does somewhat better against Austria. In 1914, they're able to defeat the Austrians twice, but the Austrians are able to turn the tide with the help of the Germans. In a battle near Limanauer, Austria is able to defeat Russia, and they're able to drive them back east, and they're able to completely drive them out of Austria 2 weeks later. So at this time, Russia's war effort is very weak. Russia comes into World War I unprepared. They had political turmoil on top of the fact that they were already unprepared. They were not industrialized. They did not have the supplies that the Western armies, like the British and the French and the Germans had. They did not have the supplies. They didn't have food, gas, the ammunition they did not have. Like I said, their politics were in turmoil, so it led to lots of shortages on these items. They couldn't get items from the Allies because they, in the north, the German naval fleet was blocking access to the Baltic Sea. In the south, the Ottomans controlled the straits that led to the Mediterranean Sea. So they were pretty much locked in. They had no way of getting supplies to them. The one thing that was on the side of the Russians was their numbers. They had strength in numbers. Even though they had suffered about 2 million casualties in 1915 alone, they were able to rebuild their army because of their population. And they were able to kind of keep Germany for 3 years on the Eastern Front, which kept Germany from being a strong force on the Western Front. So the one thing that Russia really had going for them was their numbers. Okay, the next video you're going to watch is going to talk about the war turning into a more global effort, the joining of the Ottomans, and the joining of other nations. So you're going to watch that video, and it's also going to talk about the end of the war.